Hi, I'm Brianna Burt from Saskatoon, and this is a song I wrote called Pink Tea for the musical The Famous Five.
Pink tea, 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 pink tea. Let's get together for a pink tea. Talk about weather only briefly. Then we move on to women's rights.
Women's rights? We will put up a fight.
Pink tea, it's a disguise, we call it pink tea. No one's the wiser, yes we drink tea. That's no surprise, but then it's time.
Let's get on with it. We haven't got all day.
Emily, what is the reason for this pink tea? Yes, there's an urgency for meeting. I've made a petition, we should sign.
Tell us more. What would you like us to sign?
Ladies, I'm stunned. Women are not considered persons, not in the legal sense. Look, section 24 of the British North American Act.
Ladies, women cannot be appointed to the Senate.
Pink tea, let's take a sip, we're drinking pink tea. Dabbing our lips, we are so dainty, making sure no one's in the know.
Fooling everyone, we put on quite a show.
Pink tea, scones and desserts.
I prefer strong tea.
Whatever works, no right or wrong tea. Make sure the coast is clear and stark.
Give the papers here, we all must do our part.
Thinking it is our duty to be fighting. Fight for our future, we are mighty. Just like the men we don't invite.
They don't understand that women are quite bright.
Solving problems cannot be fixed by wishing. Biting our tongues to stop from cursing. Remember to still be ladylike.
Oh, see here, I will do what I like.
Pink tea, plans and decisions at the pink tea. Need no permission, it's equality. That is what suffrage is about.
It's the reason I will not shut my mouth.
Pink tea, sign the petition at the pink tea. Our little secret give a clink clink while we pretend we're playing cards.
Yes, whose turn is it? I have the Queen of Hearts.
Pink tea, 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 pink tea.
Brianna Burt. Thank goodness for artists. A number of different ways that we can tell the story about who has built Canada and give us encouragement to continue to build Canada. So welcome everyone. Bienvenue. On behalf of the Famous Five Foundation and particularly of our Director of Events, Preeta Kalar, we welcome you to a special Friday, a Famous Five Friday. And this is a day when women feel extra empowered and also see lots of opportunities. Thank you for coming to spend your hour with us. We are thrilled that we have guests from across Canada, from 7 provinces, from 1 territory, and from a number of Indigenous schools. As well, we're very grateful to the people who are gathering around the kitchen table, the mothers who have gathered their children to learn just a little more about Canada and meet and see some incredible Canadians. And also there are a few folks gathering in boardrooms, I understand, with masks. So again, thank you very, very much for doing so. The pink teas are a way of celebrating women's leadership. of showing you some fantastic female leaders, and also to give you a chance to think about how you too can be a better leader. And we have 5 terrific female leaders today, 3 Indigenous women and 2 Indigenous girls, and also another wonderful person. So today is going to be a special Famous 5 day, as we've talked about. And oops, my notes here. And there are some very fine leaders in our chat room. So we encourage you to continue to say hi in the chat room, because someone is going to be quite surprised to see you there and very pleased and will contact you. And that's one of the ways we want to build our network. Now, our anthem says, "True patriot love in all of us command." That means Canada needs all of us to lead. And for nearly 20 years, we have had the pleasure of having a corporation be a leader and help sponsor the Famous 5 Foundation. Enbridge has helped us present, obviously prior to COVID, lunches and receptions in Calgary, in Ottawa, in Fort McMurray, in Edmonton, and in Sarnia. So we're very grateful for Enbridge for stepping forward and saying, yes, women's leadership does matter. And there should be a number of ways that we honor this. And this they have done through the lunches, but also through the youth awards. And now for the last 7 months through these virtual pink teas. And now it's my pleasure to introduce to you Jody Whitney. Jody is going to bring us greetings on behalf of Enbridge and also introduce our 2 marvelous conversationalists. Jody is a senior strategist with Enbridge regarding Indigenous issues, Indigenous collaboration. She's a member of the Tsuut'ina Nation, has got an education with a BA in, what was your BA in? A BA was in political science. And then she did a master's degree in justice studies, but also she has a special interest in French. So a very cosmopolitan person. Her commitment to education and to developing sustainable development for Indigenous folks makes her an exceptional leader and benefits the rest of us too. So Jody, thank you very much. And through you, my thanks to Enbridge. And now it's over to you to bring greetings and to introduce 2 magnificent people. Thank you.
Zinese Gutja, Seze Jody Whitney, Sinajana Suotena. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm sharing this important introduction today from Treaty 4 territory in southern Saskatchewan, home of the Plains Cree, the Anishinaabe, the Nakota, Dakota, and Lakota nations. I also acknowledge the Métis homelands. It's an honor to be here today on behalf of Enbridge to introduce the 7th speaker in the virtual Pink Tea conversation. We've been a proud supporter of the Famous 5 Foundation for nearly 20 years, and we wholeheartedly support the Foundation's vision to champion the development and recognition of Canadian female leaders. We share this goal within Enbridge. We want all our employees, regardless of gender, race, or religious belief, to be welcomed and treated fairly. On November 6th, Enbridge announced a series of environmental, social, and governance performance goals on emissions reduction, increased diversity, and inclusion and safety. Achieving 3.5% representation within our workforce of Indigenous people by 2025 is one of our most important goals. New employees will be required to complete Indigenous cultural awareness training by the end of 2021, and having 100% of all employees complete the training by 2022. We have advanced diversity and inclusion in the workplace for many years, and our progress and learning will continue to help build understanding of Indigenous cultures, rights, and traditions, both within and outside Enbridge. Today's speaker, Dr. Nadine Caron, exemplifies learning and collaboration in the healthcare system, focused on advancing Indigenous health. Earlier this year, Dr. Caron, Canada's first female First Nations general surgeon, was named Founding First Nations Health Authority Chair in Cancer and Wellness at UBC. a newly created position dedicated to improving cancer outcomes and wellness among Indigenous peoples. As the first female First Nations student to graduate from UBC's medical school, she won the Hamburg Gold Medal as the top graduating student and was named one of Maclean's 100 Canadians to watch. Thanks to Dr. Caron's dedication and leadership, UBC is becoming the learning center of choice for the next generation of Indigenous doctors, surgeons, nurses, dentists, and other healthcare professionals. Dr. Caron grew up in Kamloop, the daughter of an Ojibwe survivor of residential schools and an immigrant from Italy. She completed her BSc in kinesiology at Simon Fraser University, where she was also a star basketball player. Her medical degree from UBC followed, and then a move to Boston. Why Boston? Well, instead of sleeping, Dr. Caron also earned an MA in public health from Harvard University while completing her surgical residency. Next, she moved to San Francisco and completed her postgraduate fellowship training at the University of California, focused on endocrine surgical oncology. But her love for British Columbia brought her home. She lives in Prince George with her husband and daughter, and since January 2005 has been working as a general and endocrine surgeon at the University Hospital of Northern BC. Dr. Caron embodies two-eyed seeing, a First Nations philosophy which encourages the recognizing of the worth and valuing of the gift of multiple perspectives as a way for different cultures to compare and contrast, to learn and to share from one another. For many years now, Dr. Caron has given voice not only to Indigenous people, but to Northern residents and rural populations by bringing their unique perspectives and needs to the forefront. The design, implementation, and evaluation of surgical care in British Columbia is becoming more equitable, and its impact is resonating across Canada. This super achiever and multiple award recipient is included in Peter Mansbridge's new book, Extraordinary Canadians, and that's who is leading our conversation today. Peter Mansbridge is an award-winning journalist, a distinguished fellow at the Monk School of Global Affairs at the University of Toronto, and a member of numerous boards and committees. He is best known for his 5 decades at CBC, where he was chief correspondent of CBC News and anchor of The National. He has won dozens of awards for outstanding journalism, has 13 honorary doctorates from universities in Canada and the United States, and received Canada's highest civilian honor, the Order of Canada. Peter Mansbridge is the former Chancellor of Mount Allison University and is currently the President of Manscorp Media Services, where his work includes documentary film production. Peter hosts a podcast called The Bridge and was a major resource for many Canadians during the recent presidential election in the United States. Thank you, Dr. Caron and Peter, for being with us today. It's now my pleasure to turn over the program to an extraordinary Canadian, Peter Mansbridge. Peter, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Jody. That was very kind of you. Wonderful introduction. Nadine, welcome. Great to see you and to talk to you, as always. I've got obviously a few questions I wouldn't mind throwing towards you. Let me start, first of all, though, by just saying to viewers that this book, Extraordinary Canadians, is a reflection not only of the 17 people that my co-author Mark Bulgich and I profile, but it's really a reflection of you and your country. And we're lucky enough today to have 2 of those 17 people. Obviously, I'm going to focus on Nadine, but Frances Wright is one of the 17 as well, a good friend of mine, and very pleased and proud that she's focused in the book as well, that our focus is on her. All right, Nadine, let's talk about a few things, starting with the fact that you are in Prince George. I'm in Stratford, Ontario, by the way. That's where I live, just a little outside of Toronto. Nadine, you're in Prince George. You're working at the hospital there. So apart from everything else, part of the reason we're doing this event the way we're doing it is because of the pandemic. So a sense from you of what it's like being at the front lines of healthcare right now, in dealing with COVID at your hospital. How has it changed things in your community?
I mean, that's the question of the year, isn't it? I think one thing that we're realizing that There's not a big difference between healthcare providers and Canadians across the country that need healthcare and how we need to work together. We need to trust each other. We need to work together. And the front lines really are not just the healthcare providers. When I go in to get grocery shopping, I look at those people that are on the front lines. They're facing a broad range of individuals coming in through and getting their groceries, getting necessary supplies, getting what they need to survive. And they're out there and doing what we need to do to keep society moving. And you can say the same thing for transport, teachers. There's so much that it's, I think, been a really leveling experience with respect to everyone needs to trust each other. We need to trust that our patients are following the guidelines, and the patients need to trust us that we're also following the guidelines, and we really are in it all together. It's stressful, but I think it's really important to recognize that it's stressful for everybody.
And I think you make a wonderful point, because I think we've all had to redefine what it means to be essential when we describe essential workers, because you're quite right. Front lines of healthcare, obviously, but whether it's grocery store clerks or farmers or truck drivers, we've redefined what's essential in our community, while many of us are staying at home because we're asked to and because it's good for the overall picture. But nevertheless, many others are out there on the front lines in different ways. All right, let's talk about you. Because I still, you know, whenever you're introduced, and I've been one who's introduced you before, when we talk about you're the first at this, the first at that, it's always hinged in some fashion to your Indigenous background. But on the one hand, that's a great accomplishment. On the other hand, it's kind of a burden, isn't it, being first? Talk about that.
I think a burden, and then depending on the day and how I'm feeling that day, responsibility and an opportunity. And I think it's making sure that you try to keep on the positive side of things as much as you can, and you surround yourself with people who can keep you seeing it that way. I think the most important thing is to recognize that the first means that there was a gap that needed to be filled. Now, the first going to Mars, that's going to be something different, because, you know, that's a massive, massive accomplishment. But when you're the first, when hundreds of thousands of people have done it already, but you're the first because you're looking at through the Indigenous lens in Canada, then it's really a time for the nation to look back and kind of go, like, what gap was that filling? And then recognize that if there's a first, it also means you're the only. And that's a really lonely place to be. And that's a really inappropriate thing to celebrate for Canadians and for the country. And so you have to work, you have to be part of the solution. You have to figure out, how do you change the only into a few? How do you change the few into the many? And then real success is when you have Indigenous students graduating in the health professions, or you have Indigenous leaders becoming prime minister and MPs and MLAs, and you have all of this. And you're kind of like not recognizing that they're Indigenous because it's not unexpected. It's something that's happened so many times that you really want Indigenous people in those leadership roles and in those professions, and you need them, and they add something to it. It's not something extraordinary. It's something very ordinary. What a safe place we would be if that was the case.
Where are we on that curve towards the ultimate goal?
It depends on what we're looking at. But in healthcare, which is where I'm sort of focused, where I get to work every day, and I get to work whether it's as a physician or whether it's at UBC at the Center for Excellence in Indigenous Health, where I'm surrounded by amazing teammates and amazing colleagues who are working in this field. I think for the most part, there's a lot of firsts that are coming out, and you celebrate them and you congratulate them and you support them because they have done something amazing. It's just really hard to become, whether it's a surgeon or a dentist or a nurse or a midwife, it's just a really hard thing to do. So congratulate them. I think in some places we're celebrating the few, but I don't really see in healthcare where we're looking at the many. And I think we're seeing that across the board, whether it's in reports, whether in its statistics, whether it's inquiries, where people are saying we need a greater representation of Indigenous peoples across the board in all healthcare professions, not just as healthcare professionals, but in leadership roles, in people that are driving policy and driving change and have the capacity to do it.
And I think we see that still in many professions in Canada, not just healthcare. Of the many stories in your segment in the book, one that I get quite emotional when I reread it, having been part of the author team on it. It's the story that you tell about the 80-year-old Indigenous woman who comes in to your office, not realizing initially that you too are Indigenous.
Yeah.
Can you tell that story? Because it's really revealing.
Yeah. And it's I remember this lady, she had to travel some distance to get into my office. And she was coming for a specific reason that she was referred to me for. And we started talking, and of course you just start by finding out where someone's from. And so I asked her what nation she was from. She was First Nations, from a drive about 3-4 hours away from what I recall. And I said, well, that, I'm Anishinaabe. I'm from the Sagamok Anishinaabe First Nation, and that's based way over in Ontario. And I tell that to a lot of my First Nation patients. It's a grounding point. It's something we have in common. We often go off on tangents about a lot of stories that follow with that. But in this case, it was a very different response. And I too will never forget it. And I too Peter, you're interviewing me, so I brought Kleenex because you have this innate ability to get the stories out. And so her response was, she broke down in tears. She broke down in tears because she said, I never thought that I would ever have an Indian doctor. Like she was absolutely gobsmacked that someone that she had traveled in to see would be First Nations, would be in this role, would have this education, would have had these opportunities and right away she's like, you got to come to my community. You got to meet my grandkids. You got to come and talk to my community. And she just wanted this story out there to share, that it was almost as if she thought, if I go back and say this, people are not going to believe that this is possible. And I think that's a reflection of the concept of where Indigenous people are in the healthcare professions currently and where we need to be, so that one day maybe a First Nations person can say, I have to see a neurosurgeon. I would really like it if I could see a First Nations neurosurgeon. I would feel comfortable in that space. Wouldn't that be amazing?
The other part of that story is powerful as that element of it is, and it is powerful. You decided to dig a little deeper into her background, and you suddenly realized that the kind of things that were normal and expected and routine for non-Indigenous patients of her age, none of which had happened for her during her lifetime.
Exactly. And that's something that I often do when I am seeing a patient. You're sort of expected as a general surgeon to focus on the area that was of concern to the patient, which is why they're in your office. In this case, she was there for one reason, but I started going over her medical records and asking her questions about what her past medical history is, what we call it, to just get an idea of her background, health, and wellness. And then I started realizing that some of the fundamental elements of just general care, things like screening mammograms to screen for breast cancer, things like colon cancer screening that she had never had. And there's higher rates of colon cancer in First Nations people, and yet she had not had this screening. There's these elements that are just, as we go through, there's higher rates of diabetes, but I couldn't find a hemoglobin A1C, a standard test that we do to look for early detection of diabetes. And there's all these things missing. And so it's interesting because Some of my colleagues kind of laugh at me when I'm the general surgeon ordering hemoglobin A1Cs and ordering tests just to try to build up that healthcare and that wellness and that whole perspective. Because I think that as a surgeon, you don't need to be pigeonholed into someone that works with a scalpel. I think you have the honor of working with a human being. And if I can keep focused on that, I will have the opportunity to meet and hear the stories of people well beyond that little tiny part of their history. And that's an honor.
You know, I'm lucky that I've got some help in asking questions today. And I'm going to go to our first extra questioner right now. Her name is Veda Crowchild. She's from the Stetina High School. That's just on the kind of the southwest outskirts, I think, of Calgary. And she's got a question for you, Dr. Caron. So over to you, Veda.
Dada Nastara, I am Veda Crowchild. I'm in grade 9 at Stetina Junior High School, and I've experienced racism. I wanted to know how you've overcome racism. Nani Sane.
Ani, Veda, thank you, Chimigwech, for that question. Yeah, the big R word, hey? You're such a courageous kid, young lady, for asking that question. How have I overcome racism? The first thing I would say, Veda, is that the real accurate question would be, how am I overcoming racism? So if you're experiencing it, recognize that this is something that is out there and that we are overcoming it. And I'm not talking about it in the past tense. How am I overcoming it? Well, one thing I think I've really focused on is recognizing that in whatever context you're feeling it, whether it's something you hear, something that someone has done, something that you witness being done or heard or said to somebody else, I think one of the first things is to just, to your core, know that it is wrong, know that it is unacceptable, know that it is not tolerated. And then the other thing is, recognize that if something is being said to you or to a friend or to a loved one or something, you witness it happening, also know that it's not your fault. That if someone says something mean, someone says something racist, it's not about you. It's actually about the poor individual, that unfortunate individual that sees the world through a lens that is not correct and is not accurate. And if you can build that core, then you have it sort of like as your armor. And so when you're out there and you have a day where you're experiencing it or you witness it, you feel like you have that strength to be a warrior to get through it. That's important. And then once you have that armor, you're going to get dents in it. You're going to get cracks in it, and you're going to have days that it's going to get through. Then you need to surround yourself by people that are going to help you get through it. You're going to find trusted adults that you can talk to. You're going to find friends that you can run it by. You're going to have someone that you can vent to. And then you're going to recognize that when you see that and you look at it as a barrier to maybe making a team or getting an opportunity, and later in life, even a job or education, you're going to find ways to get around that barrier, get over it, dig under it, or break right through it. Here's where it gets a little bit more difficult. Once you get through it, the first thing you need to do, once you dust yourself off and you have that pride that you did it, turn around. Because you know what? I can just tell by just the confidence in your voice that you're going to be someone that your classmates, your younger siblings, your older siblings, your community members are going to be able to turn to, that you're going to be able to help. And I think it's all of us working together to get through this is going to be so critical. A big step I made was I stayed in school. I stayed in school and I found a career that I loved. And so I'm really lucky now with where I am at UBC. And I'm really lucky being a healthcare professional. And I'm really lucky being in that space. And I built up these tools so I can be there. And so one of the best pieces of advice that I got from a mentor when it came to racism in the healthcare system, I was told, Nadine, don't let the healthcare profession change you, change the profession. So I don't want to put a lot of pressure on you, Veda, but by just a little bit that I've seen of you and the courage that you've had to ask that question, go out and change the world.
You know, one of the things I'm lucky enough to know about you, Nadine, is that you've got an incredible family, including an amazing daughter.
Yes.
I wonder what you say to her. Obviously, the lessons that you've just given us are part and parcel of what you tell her, but what do you tell her about racism?
Yeah. You know what? My daughter, who's actually Veda's age, and so that question really hit me right to the heart, and just seeing Veda. Ali and I talk a lot. She's come to Sagamok with me multiple times. We've been through ceremony together. She learned first from Anokamis, my mom. She spends so much time with my mom. We have great discussions about all of this. We've talked about the Mary Ellen Tapelefont's report. We talk about the Truth and Reconciliation. We talk about residential schools. And Peter, you and I both know we've talked about this. There was a point where I didn't bring things up because it's not a part of Canada's history that you want anybody to, in a way, feel like they're a part of a country that is possible of doing that. When they're so young, you want them to just see joy, and you want them to see happiness, and you want them to see good, and you want them to believe in the world around them. I realize, as a CBC watcher, she is, for the most part, that I couldn't shelter her, that it was better to simply put out the questions and have the discussions, and put her in environments where she could ask, put her in environments where she could witness, put her in environments that, would make her cry, but then also put her in an environment that would make her safe, that she could talk about it and realize that this is a world that exists now, but it can be different, and she can be part of the solution, just like Veda can.
Well, she too, like Veda, is a powerful young woman, and you're kind of bookended by powerful women.
Yes.
Your mother's one too, who went through the residential school system. And I wonder what you draw upon from that experience. And, you know, I'm not trying to get you to reach for the Kleenex box again, because I know how significant your mom and your daughter are in your life. But in terms of your mother's experience, which has become a shared experience, not only with you, but with your daughter now, learning from it. What do you take away from that?
I mean, for people that know my mom, she is one of the most joyous people. She has a wonderful laugh, a gorgeous smile. She has such a bright spark. She looks at the world as a good place. And she's a residential school survivor. And I think that has taught me what resilience really means. It's taught me the power of human spirit. It's taught me the power of family. It's taught me the power of friendship. When basically you couldn't go back to Sagamok without visiting my mom's friend Shirley, who went through residential school with her all the way. You couldn't go without visiting Shirley. And it's been all of that. And then when I'm going through tough times, particularly when it's related to racism, challenges in the healthcare system, challenges in work environments, going to my mom and running it by her and asking her what she would do, what does she think. I even asked her about this talk. What do you think, Mom? and her answer, of course, is it's more important what you think. I said, maybe it's more important what I think, but I need to know that you're going to be out there. I need to know that you're with me, and it's just this link that is unbreakable. And I know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, I know every day how lucky I am to have a link to my parents that is unbreakable. That is something that will never be taken for granted. And interestingly enough, my mom's link to my grandparents was unbreakable, despite what they tried to do with the residential school system. It was unbreakable.
We've got another question from a budding young journalist, perhaps. And this one is from Tiana Cardinal, who is a grade 8 student at Kikino School in a Métis settlement in northeast Alberta that's up near Cold Lake. Both Veda and Tiana are part of Becky Scott's program, Spirit North. Okay. Tiana, let's hear your question for Dr. Carroll.
Tansei, I'm Tiana. I'm in grade 8 at Kikino School. I'm interested in knowing about the relationships between being Indigenous and professional knowledge. So my question for Dr. Caron is, how does being Indigenous help you be a better surgeon?
Wow, these are firecrackers of students. Amazing question. An amazing question, Tiana. And I have not been asked that question before, I don't think, in quite that way. Well, one, how does being Indigenous make me a better surgeon? I hope it does, but that's really for my patients to decide. And I think that's a real critical point. See, surgery is interesting. It was what I was really drawn to surgery when I was in, even before I got into medical school. Peter tells that story in his book. I was drawn to surgery, but in a way, out of all the things you can do in medicine, surgery is almost on the far end of the spectrum of what the real concept of Indigenous health and wellness is. Like, once the operation starts, Tiana, and I'm doing my thing, it's really based on the anatomy, on where the arteries and the blood vessels and the veins are, where the tumor is, because I do a lot of cancer surgery. So I'm really focused on the anatomy. I'm focused on physiology. So, the impact on the heart and lungs, and working with the anesthesiologist, the doctor that's keeps the patient asleep during the operation. I'm thinking about pathology, which is sort of what's wrong with the tissues or the organs that makes me be there on that particular day to be cutting out part of this sacred human body. It's really on one end of the spectrum. So what makes being Indigenous, how does that impact what I think I bring as an Indigenous surgeon, which may be different, is the inability for me to separate the curing of a cancer by cutting it out, with recognizing that the overall health of that human being, that person, that mother, that father, that child, that neighbor, that friend, that community member, that is including the mental health, the social, the emotional, the spiritual health. And how can I be part of that solution so that their journey through the healthcare system, that I'm a small part of, that I can actually lend support and respect in those areas. And I think that's really, really important, because that's what we need to fix in the healthcare system. In the end, I think that when an Indigenous person is on an operating table, I think that the surgeon is focused on the tumor and they're not drawing any distinction. But I think the journey up until the point that that patient's asleep, I think that journey needs to be fixed. And I think the journey after that patient wakes up, that journey needs to be fixed. And I think as an Indigenous surgeon, I realized that a small part of my profession is actually operating. My responsibility is to respect the individual, to honor the fact that I have a small little part in it. And I think most of all, Tiana, is when it comes to being a surgeon, I think that I hope that it matters that I'm Indigenous. I hope that when I'm, especially if I have a First Nation patient walk through the door, I hope that that element of my background, of who I am, makes us connect so that their journey is safer kinder, more respectful, and ultimately we create a relationship that is built on trust. I hope that's how being Indigenous helps. I hope that is. And now I'm going to think about that more than ever because of you.
You know, I don't know how often you do mentorship outside of your own family, Nadine, but I got to tell you, the way you've mentored these two remarkable young women you've talked to in this is an indication that there's yet another profession that you could easily be first on the list of. I should tell those who are watching that in the book there are some other critical moments in Nadine's life that she talks about that are very revealing, not just about her, but about us once again. Because that's what this book really does come down to. It tells you a story about Canada, and it tells you a story about who we are and what we can accomplish. I know Frances is eager to ask some questions of her own, so let me just ask you one more, Nadine.
Sure thing.
And it's the big kind of general question. What are your hopes? What are your dreams for Canada?
For Canada. I think we sort of touched on it a bit. I mean, I have great hopes. Like, it just really depends. In an Olympic year, for example, I know who I want to be winning the gold medal for hockey. Like, you know, so I'm a normal Canadian. But when it comes to the area where I feel like I've devoted so much of my personal energy and my professional focus is certainly Indigenous health and wellness. And the role that I think that I have like the honor of being part of, a small part of, which is the healthcare system and the area of Indigenous research in health. UBC's Center for Excellence in Indigenous Health, which works in public health, and has like I said, I cannot say enough about how lucky I am and proud I am of the people that I get to work with and interact with at that center. My hope for Canada is that we continue to shift, but in a much faster sort of fast forward frame, the concept of how we're addressing racism, discrimination, stereotyping, biases, and how it's impacting the ultimate health and wellness of Indigenous peoples. Because first and foremost, I think that if we can do that, I think that it's going to help all of racism, because it's not, we have a major issue on our hands. And we were just talking about this on a phone call the other day, and I was saying how 5 years ago, what I used to deal with and what I used to hear is really, I think, way less accepted today than it was 5 years ago. And I think also what triggers me today, what bothers me today, what can even bring me to tears today, I think I wouldn't have even had too many people to talk to about 5 years ago. I would have been concerned that I was being too sensitive, I was reading into things too much, that it really wasn't that bad. And it probably wasn't that bad because there was such overt racism. So I think overall, we need to address the overt racism. We need to address the microaggressions. We need to figure out how we're going to move the entire compass in terms of what we want in our healthcare system. And I think it needs to be driven by Indigenous leadership, Indigenous voices, Indigenous representation, so that every single person walking into the healthcare system, whether it's for preventative medicine, diagnostic purposes, treatment, or follow-up, that they feel safe, they feel honored, they feel respected, they feel like they're being listened to. And then we'll see the entire shift in outcomes, and Canadians will be healthier. Canadians will be in a safer environment, will respect each other more, and we will be a better country for it.
You know, a few weeks ago, I was on a CBC radio show right when our book went on sale, and the interviewer, I think it was Pia Chattopadhyay, on a Sunday morning, asked me, she was, going through the book, and she said, "Nadine Caron, tell me about Nadine Caron." And I said, "I love Nadine Caron." And people said to me after, Really? Like you love Nadine Caron? Now you know why I said that. Francis, it's over to you.
Wow. Well, Peter, thank you very much. And Nadine, what a spectacular conversation. I'm still really, I guess the word would be impacted by your answers to these questions, Nadine. And when we asked people to suggest, to register, we said to them, please give us some other questions. So I just have a couple of questions that viewers have sent in. And Nadine, Nanette, would like to know, while racism is a major issue for you to overcome, what was the second major issue or challenge that you've had to overcome?
It depends. Like, all right, I think overall, the career path I took was a challenging career path. So I think there's lots of challenges that I think every medical student faces, every surgery resident faces, every, you know, like all of that. But I think with respect to this question, and it's Nanette, I think, honestly, and this is why, you know, the Famous Five resonated with me in terms of what they did. First of all, they were 5 female leaders in our country that were first in their various ways. And the other thing is they were first in a time when being first female, not first female Indigenous, just first female. And I think that I've certainly felt that. I think medicine has turned a corner, like by the time I got into medical school, it was about 50-50. Then pick surgery, and all of a sudden you're right back down in it. You're surrounded by a much greater percentage of male counterparts. And then when you look at leadership in surgery, it pretty much peters out like significantly. And then when you start to look at picking academia and going into that field, or being a surgeon in particularly a more remote area, you all of a sudden want to be a mother and be a surgeon. And then you have beautiful Alia, my daughter, in a car seat in the corner of an operating room because you're breastfeeding, and as much as your husband wants to help you, he can't help you. And so you're there in the middle of the night. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, and you have your daughter in the operating room. And I was lucky. I was supported by nurses that just really got it and thought that was awesome. You're on boards, and all of a sudden, being a mother and being on a board, you really had to get the message across that you want me, you've got my daughter and I, we're welcome. And so Alia learned how to tie shoes by crawling under the floor at the Michael Smith Foundation for Health Research and untying all the dress shoes and then tying them back up again. And everyone, you know, and so she grew up kind of sort of recognizing that if it wasn't a place that was welcoming for children, it wasn't a place that her mom wanted to be. And that meant being a mother. It meant being female. It meant being in places that leadership, you're still kind of hitting a glass ceiling that I don't think has gone away completely. But I think we've made massive, massive, massive steps. It's certainly way secondary to being Indigenous, but I think we have the Famous Five to thank for that.
Well, thank you, Nadine. And whatever you're doing is helping all of us. So keep being a leader for sure. And another colleague of yours, what's her name? Diana. Diana worked with you on a committee to implement a national pharmacare program. And she's with us today and wondering what's happened to that program. And would you please talk about how it's would be particularly valuable to Indigenous people?
Mm-hmm. You know, I think what's happened to that for the readers, what I would suggest is go and look up the report that Eric Hoskins and our committee put together with respect to a blueprint for national pharmacare. That was tabled in June 2019. It didn't have much time to gain momentum until, of course, we were hit by COVID-19, which means by definition that it occurred later on in the year, although it didn't really hit Turtle Island until 2020. And now we understand the true force of the pandemic. And so it's been sort of tabled and pushed to the side for emergency responses to the pandemic. But I think it's still, you could still see it in terms of the original responses that the government had. And then even now when they're talking about next steps, and pharmacare continues to be mentioned. I think that a national pharmacare, which means providing an equitable access to prescription medications for Canadians, is well overdue. I think it's well documented in the report. I think we need to do it. And I think now when there was a lot of Canadians that felt comfortable that they didn't have to worry about their medications because they had medical benefits through their jobs that provided it, now all of a sudden are realizing that those horror stories from the United States actually can occur in Canada. If you lose your job, you lose your medication coverage, and those drugs cost money. The other thing I find fascinating is when it comes to what if there's a medication that's covered that we're talking vaccinations. What if we end up with something like Tamiflu, which is a medication that treats like the general, like the flu? What if we come up with a treatment for it? That's going to cost an incredible amount of money. If the world's panicking about prevention, it's going to panic about getting access to treatment. That treatment's going to be incredibly expensive. And Canada is not a country that can afford to be a country that we will treat based on what you can afford to pay, not on what you need. I think it needs to be rolled out. I'm a firm believer in it. I think that there's a great basis on which to build. And if listeners want to look into it, it's available online. It's the blueprint for the National Pharmacare.
Thank you, Nadine. Now, Peter, there were also some questions for you. Questions like, what are you doing with all your spare time? And really liked your promo for Stratford. But the question that we received, I think it was Kelly asked, was in terms of the questions you have not asked. I mean, you've asked spectacular questions all your life, but what's that one question you wish you had asked somebody? Or conversely, what's the one question you wish somebody would have asked you? So, Peter, what do you say?
No, I'm not going to tell you the answer to that last one.
Sure.
I'm happy I haven't been asked. Look, let me put it this way. You know, I've done a lot of interviews. I try to count them up. It's somewhere around 20,000 that I've done over the 50 years that I've been in this business. Most of them have gone fairly well, you know, but there have been some real difficulties because either I couldn't get to the question I wanted, or I didn't ask the one I should have, or I was just, you know, facing a brick wall. And you like stories about, you know, smart, engaging, powerful women. Margaret Thatcher was the toughest interview I've ever done. Now, I interviewed her 3 times, twice while she was prime minister, and those went fairly well. And once when she was out of office, ignominiously, she got kind of booted out by her own party. But she was on a book tour, traveling the world, selling her book, The Downing Street Years. And we did this interview, and I was looking forward to it because I wanted to try to get at the heart of what it's like to be a leader of a world power in the midst of a major conflict. And the particular conflict I wanted to talk about was the Falklands War, 1982, where she was responsible for sending this huge task force to the Southern Atlantic. And so I was trying to get at it, what it was she, what it felt like, what it was like at night when she was trying to fall asleep, when knowing that the lives of all these men and women were in her hands. And every time I asked a question relating to that, she said, "Well, you've obviously never read the book." Like I actually had read the book. But, you know, it didn't matter what question I asked. It was, "You obviously never read the book." What I should have said at that point was, "Did you actually write it?" Because I knew she hadn't written it. She had 3 ghostwriters write it. But I didn't ask it.
Yeah.
And whether I didn't have the courage or it just was running out of time, whatever, I didn't ask it. It would have been a real flame moment, that's for sure. But here's the end of the Margaret Thatcher story. The interview ends. I thank her. She's gruffly sort of mumbles something. The cameras stop, the lights go out, and she looks at me because right beside me I had her book, copy of the Downing Street Years. In fact, it's in my library here in Stratford. And she looked over it and she said, suddenly in a totally different voice, she said, "Peter, would you like me to sign that book?"
Aww.
I thought, where was this person 5 minutes ago when I was trying to do this interview, right? So maybe that's the question that I never asked that I should have. But I've been pretty lucky. People have been great, and for some reason they don't mind talking to me, like Nadine, and like you, Francis. When you were talking, I know you talked a lot with my co-author Mark Bulgach for your segment, and when you're an author or a reporter or a journalist trying to tell a story, you need people to open up, to be honest, to gain that thing that Nadine was talking about that she's trying to gain with her patients, and that's trust. There's got to be some trust between those two elements to get the real story.
I thank you very much for opening up today, both Peter and Nadine. It's been a wonderful conversation. I think a number of us would hope that it would go on and on, but we all have other things to do. So I thank you, Peter. I thank you, Nadine, for being yourselves, for making a contribution to Canada, and for encouraging others to make their contribution to Canada. So it's been really a pleasure to get to know the two of you better, and for others to get to know you and realize what's possible in Canada. Because the two of you not only talk about it, you do it. And that is so empowering, and that is so inspiring. You're both very inspiring people, extraordinary Canadians. So I'm going to say thank you very much to you, Nadine, and to you, Peter. We're going to take you off screen just for a moment, because now I'm going to talk about the Famous Five Foundation just for a moment, and to bring some news about what's happening there. And it turns out today we're going to have 5 toasts. And the first toast is to the 4 remarkable Indigenous women we met today. 2 women, I guess, and 2 girls. 4 Indigenous leaders. And so I would like you to take your glass or your cup of tea and raise it in a toast to Nadine, to Jody, to Veda, and to Tiana. 2 Indigenous female leaders. Cheers. Thank you. And we wouldn't have had Tiana and Veda with us today if it wasn't for Becky Scott. Becky Scott, as you know, is a gold Olympian winner, medalist. And when she retired, she established an organization called Spirit North. And every year they help 7,000 Indigenous children and youth across Canada to become more of themselves, to become leaders, to become better students. And generally this is done through sports. So I would like to raise a toast to Becky Scott and Spirit North, and announce an informal partnership that we at the Famous Five Foundation are delighted to be part of. So to Becky Scott and to Spirit North, cheers. And now it's time to talk about our next series of virtual pink teas, because even though we're going to perhaps getting the vaccines later in the year, this is a national organization, a national conversation, and we've truly enjoyed getting together over the last 7 months, and we will get together again for the next 12 months. And so we've started organizing a virtual pink tea series for 2021. Granted, we still need to find some sponsors. Hello, sponsors. And to confirm some special guests. And what we're going to start off with is not on the very first Famous Five Friday of the month of January, but rather on January 22nd. Why January 22nd? Well, it's 2 days after the inauguration of, exactly, 2 days after the inauguration of the first woman vice president of the United States, Kamala Harris. So we're going to get together on the 22nd and celebrate that and hear from some other Canadian leaders. And then on February the 12th, we're going to celebrate the retiring artistic director of the National Ballet of Canada and a terrific ballerina, Karen Kane. So here's to the fun and the learning through the 2021 virtual Pink Tea series. With all your help, I'm toasting to you as the subscribers, the supporters of that series. Thank you. And now I wonder if our wonderful technical people can please put the camera back on Peter, because I told Peter, and Nadine knows too, that we're going to do a special toast to Peter. I can't see on my screen, but I'm hoping you can see Peter sitting in his lovely library, luxuriating in the knowledge that he is a grand Canadian, an extraordinary Canadian, a magnificent man. But, you know, when the Famous Five achieved their victory of the persons case, it was to cause the definition of the word persons to always include women and men and women. Nobody was excluded. And so today I'm very proud to introduce, perhaps for the last time, but certainly for the first time, the inauguration of the Honorary Woman Prize or Award. And that goes to Peter Mansbridge, our first honorary woman. To Peter.
Well, thank you very much. For this day alone, I should be called Peter Womansbridge.
Yeah. Yes. That's fabulous, Peter. Peter Womansbridge. I love it. Yeah. And the last toast goes to each and every one of you, because each and every one of you is a fabulous woman leader, or in Peter's case, a woman, honorary woman leader. So I would like you to realize the leadership capacity within you and the leadership possibilities within you. And I would like you to toast to yourselves by saying, to me, I'm a leader too. So please raise your glasses and toast and say, to me, I'm a leader too.
To me, I'm a leader too.
Well, thank you. This has been a wonderful, wonderful virtual Pink Tea, a fantastic way to end 2020. We're going to leave the chat room open now for another 15 minutes so you can continue networking or pass along your comments to Nadine and to Peter, your thanks, your gratitude, I'm sure. And we will enjoy a musical tribute that was recorded by the Mount Royal University Cantoray Choir in Calgary, and it pays tribute to the healthcare workers. But as Peter said earlier, and Nadine too, it's expanding this tribute to all the people that have helped us get through COVID. So here's to Cantoray, and thank you. Please stay COVID safe, be happy, and come back and see us on January 22nd. Miigwech, merci, thank you very, very much. Take care. Bye-bye.